One example of a psychosocial hazard is the responsibility to care for or lead other people. Leadership is complex enough by itself, and leading some people can be more difficult than leading others. We'll talk with a leader whose lived experience provides a roadmap on how to deal with difficult people in the workplace on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast.
From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each episode, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk Psych Health and Safety.
Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. The exact definition of a difficult person varies depending on who's doing the assessment. One member of the Harvard Business Review editorial staff suggests that the examples include passive-aggressive, insecure bosses, pessimists, victim mentality, know-it-alls, tormentors, and biased or political operators. Other consultants add interpreters, ignorers, bores, prima-donnas, work martyrs, whiners, negativity spreaders, rainmakers, and boundary crossers. They're all added to the list. If we're all sincere, we all know someone who just seems to rub us the wrong way. It's often difficult to gauge what the motivation for us being rubbed the wrong way might be. Still, some people aggravate, antagonize, fluster, or frustrate us to the point that we can still feel the associated emotion at the mere thought of them well after the exposure to them. In this episode, we'll talk to a leader, a consultant, and a former fire chief who's learned how to deal with difficult people through his lived experience. And he's also taken time out now to share this experience with other people. So let's start with an introduction from our guest with this question. So who is Jerry Streich?
Yeah, well, first of all, Jerry Streich is a father, he's a husband, and he's a man who loves to serve. And I spent 32 years in the fire service after serving in the United States Army as a combat medic. And I've been doing it for a long, long time. I moved up the ranks, fortunately, only because I probably inspired to be curious, and I always felt that if I wanted to get closer to the decision makers, I just had to move up the ranks. Right. And, my network of friends and fire chiefs and leaders essentially got me promoted. They called me and told me about a job that was open in one of the largest fire districts at the time in the state of Minnesota. I applied for it. I was the only state candidate, and I ended up getting that position. More than anything, I just like having fun. I like helping people, and I'm honored to be here today to help share some stories and lessons that I have learned through my journey in managing and leading people.
Wow. Thank you for your service times two. I don't know that I had either heard or was aware of your contribution to the armed forces. That's always very special. Yes, for folks who take time out of their lives to protect the country. So again, thanks very much. So if you hear, or when you hear psychological health and safety, what does that mean to you?
To me, that is, I'm going to say, a more formal definition, if you will, of what it means to come to work, to give your best, to be your best, to feel safe, and to just contribute to the workforce, without all kinds of biases and negativity and threats and gossiping and demeanor and dangerous behavior and defiance, all that stuff. But being able to come into a workforce that you were excited to be part of because you applied there. And then to get in there and show them what you got and actually hold to the promise that you told them you were going to do when you got there, when you interviewed. That's really my, I'm going to say, bootstrap definition of on the floor of what that means.
Right. Yeah. So there are a lot of stories. So this episode is going to debut during October, which is National Fire Prevention Month. And I actually, these last couple of years, I've tried to spend the entire month talking to fire rescue people because, well, I know a lot of them. and the other thing, too, is I think both the fire rescue service and those outside it tend to pigeonhole it and assume that the things that leaders and followers alike, their technical expertise, their interests, are only limited to fire rescue service and don't realize that there's this broad application to, so they say, if, you could get a firefighter can fix just about anything. And even a half decent fire chief could probably lead about anything because it's the job. The job is managing all kinds of stuff. Sometimes you have really no idea exactly what it is, but you know enough about it to know how to motor. So let's go back in the Wayback Machine. You mentioned it just briefly. So what is it that first got you interested in fire rescue stuff, period? After what got you there?
Yeah, well, there was no other decision for me. I grew up right next to the fire station. In fact, you could look out my childhood window and I could see the firefighters in the fire station. In fact, when there was a call at night, my road, it was Eilick Street, used to get to the main drag. And whenever they came by me at night, their lights illuminated my room. And I used to go play bocce ball with them and, sit in the trickle charger and visit with them. And they'd, give me some cookies for, if you don't know the firehouse, there's always something to eat there, right? So there was no other option. I think they just inspired me to be good people. They always had kindness in their heart. They always welcomed me. And for whatever reason, that just inspired me to want to do that job. And hence that's why I joined the military, because, I wasn't the brightest guy in school. I wasn't the most popular guy. And, I was looking for avenues because, as well as I do, we place firefighters way up on the top shelf of the social, of our society. And much like our recruitment and retention issue here in the country is people think, I don't know that I could ever get to that position. So one way to get there was to get in the military because I knew it would add to my resume, but there was no other choice for me. It was something I've always wanted to do.
Wow. I've actually met, there was a guy I spent some time with in Seattle Fire Department, had a similar experience. Now this was when he was older. He actually lived next door to the fire station, literally for years.
Yeah.
And for about 25 of those years, he'd get up and walk, across the alley to get to his job. And pretty laid back kind of guy, and just kind of your average dude, if you will.
Yeah.
And he all of a sudden decided one day he wanted to get promoted, and people almost kind of laughed at him because he went like, why would he do that? He's been that same kind of, low key kind of guy. Well, he just kind of took off. And so I want to dig into that piece a little bit. So you decided, based on living next door to the fire station, it's something you wanted to do. You go into the military, you come out, you get on the job. So once you get on the job, why do you want to be a leader?
Yeah. I don't know that I have ever planned to be a leader. I think it just came out naturally. People have, I received awards in basic training for leadership. I was an honor grad of the primary leadership development course, and it wasn't the fact, you have to go way back. I mean, there's times when, my parents were divorced, my mom was an alcoholic. We can get way into that, and so I wasn't a good student. But when I got into the military, I had all my food. I had people encouraging me. I had all those, that triangle filled, and all I could do was just keep doing better. And to have somebody like a drill sergeant tell me, you know what, Streich, you've got some leadership abilities, and people want to listen to you, and they pin the old stripes on me in basic training. I mean, that skyrocketed who I was. So, and then I really take it seriously, maybe as I'm retired now, a few years, maybe a little too seriously, but I just really take the job seriously, meaning, let's just go back to the fire service. The military is very serious, but, I never always loved to work out, but I knew there was 100,000 people that hoped I worked out because at some point I may have to come, go make a grab or something, but I just took it seriously. And there's just leadership qualities that I've had, and I just moved up the ranks by networking and applying and going to school, right? And we'll talk about, I did what we all should do, and that was trying to improve ourselves through education, because we don't know what we don't know. Right, and because we don't know what we don't know, we go to school to try to learn about it. Right. And then that gives us sort of a different context of what we're relating to. And then eventually we get experience doing that. And then we get to a point where it's like, well, I need to learn more about it. So we go learn, we go on podcasts, we listen to other people's insight, we listen to professionals, we listen to those who may not have those, 3 letters after their name or whatever. And we learn that everyone has a different view, right? And everyone has something to offer.
Sure.
And
sure.
So it just inspired me to move up. And eventually I became a chief officer, a chief of a department. I applied on the outside, and I think I was 37. So I was a young chief. I've always found myself leading generations older than me, which helped me grow. Right. Because that can be a complex kind of issue too. How you handle
Absolutely.
Those.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think being a leader is very admirable. It comes with courage. It comes with stress, and it comes with duress. Don't ever take a management or leadership role just for the money, and expect it not to come with nights of thinking of people in bed.
Right.
That you shouldn't be thinking about in bed, right? But being a leader is very admirable. Yeah.
Yeah. So something that you mentioned, again, one of these little rabbit trails I think I want to go down. Something that you mentioned connects to the discussion about psychological health and safety, I believe. So you said that coming up at home, you didn't feel like you were a great student. A lot of that having to do with what was going on at home. So that environment, again, that not my description would be, wasn't as safe as you would like it to be at home. But then when you got to the military, it felt safer. Your meals are being taken care of. There's some things you are being taken care of. And as you're being taken care of, something that's in you starts to come out. Am I kind of getting those?
That's exactly right.
Accurate?
That's what happened. I mean, when I was young, I lived in a home just like everyone else with a mom and dad. And in the 70s now, my parents divorced. And back then, marriage was the way to go, right? It's not divorce. There were more people married than divorced. So I have 3 brothers, and we were sort of, we felt like we were the problem children, not because of us, but because our parents divorced. So there must be issues in the home that other kids shouldn't hang around my home, right? And it has nothing to do with who I am as a human being. It's clearly due to the adults. Right. And I've sat on boards for youth homelessness and so on, and I understand that because I too was homeless at one time. And I understand that most of the youth issues are not related to the youth themselves. It's related to a reaction of the adults and the foundation that we all wish we had when we were a kid, right?
Right.
And until you meet people, and it took me a little while to figure out if I hang around knuckleheads, I'm going to be a knucklehead. And if I hang around 3 successful people, I will probably be the 4th. And if I hang around 3 rich people, I'll probably be the 4th. It took me a while to figure that out. Right. So when I got into the military and everybody was gone, and I had this environment of new people who were all task-driven, mission, purposeful, and we all had to complete it together because not being part of a team or being a freelancer was not an option. You could not do that many push-ups. You had to be with the team, you know?
Right. Wow. Yeah, I that's just a very interesting. Some of it's my confirmation bias because I already believe it, but it's what you described is just really a rich example of how environment really influences who people really are. I honestly believe that leaders are both born and bred. It's both. It's not either or. It is both. They are. Some are born with more tendency toward leadership, and some are developed better who didn't have as much of a tendency, but you have to have both because no matter what you were born to be, if we put you in an environment that makes it difficult for you, that you don't feel safe, you don't feel like being your best person. As a matter of fact, you could look at that leadership tendency and start to dislike it and dislike yourself if you're not in an environment that's going to foster it. And so again, you go into the military and they go, look, that's something that we think is important and we're going to support it. We're going to give you some stripes. We're going to give you a responsibility. And then as you come into the fire service, it kind of carries on. It's just an example of how important safe environments are for people so they can be their real self. Yeah.
And, one of the things in the military too that really sets us all apart from the workforce outside of the military is right away they take all your hair off. Right away they take off the bias of the fancy clothes you wear. They don't care if you're rich or poor or where you've been. You're now in the military. Mama's not here anymore. And we have to work together. They just take you right down to the ground and they don't care where you came from or who your mom and dad is or whatever. Or if you even have a mom or dad, they don't care. You can be something here.
Right.
I love about it.
Wow. So you get into the fire rescue service, you find yourself in moving up the ranks and you get that, that opportunity to be a leader of an organization. And so tell me, there's a couple sides to everything. Everything has got a pro and a con. So what are some of as you became a leader of an organization, what are some of the things that were really, really exciting and fulfilling? And some of the things that not so much so that were a little stressful and challenging for you?
Yeah. Well, exciting is one, I was, in tears when I was told I got promoted to the position and they wanted me, It was just like, wow, this guy who, basically some people said won't be anything, he's not going to make it, You move up the ranks, and even today, if you came to my house and you met me for the first time, I think people would think I eat off a golden spoon my whole life, and they don't know that. That's totally opposite. It's totally opposite, and you'll see that in my kids because they're humble, and they serve as well. But we never take it for granted that it could change tomorrow, right? So what's exciting about being a fire chief is I get to help those on the floor, do their best. I think of a leader as someone who can try to create an environment, and I don't believe I can do it all by myself. I don't think leaders can come in and do it all by themselves. They have to get buy-in, right? They have to get people to believe in them, and then they have to start a culture of change, or a culture of purpose and mission and vision, and let people see the future and drive them that direction and support them and make them feel safe. Let them know they can express their dislikes as well as their likes. And that was exciting. I had control of the budget, so I wasn't buying stuff that we really didn't need. I could go to the floor. In fact, one of the first things I did, right or wrong, but this is what my journey felt was the best thing to do, is I went in, I looked at everybody's boots and their PPE on my own. And if the boots didn't have any tread on them, I got rid of them and bought them new boots. Because if it's predictable, it's preventable. And you just, the hole in the glove got replaced. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, this guy's actually thinking about me, not his big job and title. And so it allowed me to focus on people. So what are some of the dislikes? And this may be a little longer answer, is the job changed me as a person. I really loved the job, but it came with a lot of duress and stress and emotional duress than I ever expected it to. And why? Well, when I first took the position, one of the first things the chief should do is they start to meet with maybe the outgoing chief and try to learn the culture. And maybe some chiefs do it too quickly. They come in and I'll just say any leader, let's not say chief, but any leader comes in too quickly and all of a sudden their ideas are the best ideas. When really you should take 100 days or so, to figure out what is the culture, because you may have good ideas, but you don't understand the culture. You don't understand the history of the organization. You don't understand why you don't want to mention whatever you just mentioned, because it just put it just traumatized the entire staff because they experienced something years ago you never knew of, right? But I took the position, and you may know the story, made headline news, is I inherited a few bullies. Bullies from the ground up. I went through all the personnel files, and I looked at the files. Some of the files, open them up and you hope it tells a story, right? Can blow dust out of those buggers. They haven't been looked at for years. But this is the most challenging people in our organization. And I send out a 75 question survey asking the staff of 75, how do you feel things are going? How do you feel about operating a pump? How do you feel about our culture? And then a couple of the questions, because of the work I've been doing, is there a bully in the organization? And the question was, boom, yes, there's a bully. So I identified who that individual was. In fact, there were a couple of them. The other one, every time I heard that person's name, I'd bump them down. And once I bumped him down, he ended up being the last individual that I interviewed, because people were talking about this individual and I knew about him as I was interviewing. And some of the stories they would tell me is, if this person's here, I don't come here. If I'm from my on-call staff, if I see that car in the driveway, I turn around and go home. Or they say something every leader should pay attention to. I'm scared of coming to work. When you hear that, I don't care what your budget is, if your car is getting its oil changed, if you've got a dance recital or a karate game tonight, whatever it is, your number one priority as a leader, organizational leader, just changed. It just changed. When people fear that there's someone here that can create harm, that should be your number one focus.
Right.
I did that. And I know we don't have a ton of time, but I focused on this individual. I treated him just like everyone else, as fair as I could. And fair to me means sort of equal process. The outcome may not always be the same, but I will treat you as I would treat anyone else, right? The outcome may be different. I may have two individuals who aren't showing up for training. One individual I talk to says, I'm not coming to training because I'm at a football game, blah, blah, blah. That's a choice. I have another one that says, I'm not coming to training because, Chief, I don't want anyone to know, but I'm caring for my mom who has cancer.
Right.
Two different outcomes maybe, right? But the process is the same. I talked to this individual and I told him, if you're open to constructive criticism, I'd love to give it to you. But from what I'm hearing, people are afraid of you. They say you're a bully. you poked them in the chest, all this other kind of stuff. I already know that's not going to meet the mission, vision, core values of our organization if it continues. So whatever I can do to help get through that process, I'm willing to do it. I don't know you. I'm not going to judge you, not going to buy, but I know what people are saying, and we have to fix it so it doesn't get worse. I had 4 of them turn around, 1 left, 4 of them, we're just turned around, did great. This one individual changed my life because he was a bully, and he was mean, and he was dangerous. And because the file was clean, and I'm talking to attorneys about what I should do, and talking to this individual on a regular basis, getting phone calls about road rage and all kinds of stuff from neighbors and down 35W and all kinds of stuff. I'm getting information about this individual, and I start to put in some disciplinary measures. And discipline, as you know, correct me if I'm wrong, is used to change behavior. Try to get them back onto the forward motion of the rest of the group. And that just continued to heat up the temperament. And it got to the point where I became scared. Where one night I learned that he was arrested for a domestic assault and some other stuff. And I go to the station. I typed up administrative leave, put him on leave, told him to come by the station because he's under investigation. And he got out of jail and called me and made some comments that weren't appropriate, but also very fearful for me. And the challenging part of this, Dave, is how does a guy or a gal with multiple degrees, certifications, can stand in the center of a 3-story apartment complex fire and not even break a sweat anymore? Go into the office and sweat like crazy because you're dealing with these personnel issues, these complex personnel issues that I never learned in school.
Right.
Nobody taught me how to deal with somebody who screams at me profanity and tells me I'm worthless in front of 30 others.
Wow.
Nobody has taught me how to deal with an individual that calls my boss, the council member, and the mayor and tells them how worthless I am. And nobody has taught me what to do when I'm fearful and maybe be harmed as the leader, because we all think it's the leader going down. No, this is down coming up. And then that individual has his own level of influence in the organization as a 20-year member. So they have other members now upset with this new fire chief who's coming in and picking on the guys, doesn't want the old team to succeed or whatever they come up with, all this confabulated information. And that individual, after about a year, and after that arrest, I had to do something about it. Against attorneys, I worked to terminate him. And there was a time after 3 months, we had no idea where the individual was, that he ended up coming to the fire station. I was interviewing someone across, one of my deputies across my office. His eyes basically opened up wide, and he said, "He's here." He came into the office for whatever reason. He couldn't get in because the doors was locked. It was after hours in our office. He left, and within a couple hours, we received a page. I'm at home now, 11 o'clock at night. I'm in bed. My pager goes off. Shooting, 2 down. At the address I'm very familiar with.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode.
I jump out of my bed. I go to my squad like it was my first fire, and I'm racing at Mach 10 to the fire to the area. And I live outside the city now. I'm racing there because I know that this involves this individual I've been working on. I'm trying to get a hold of the police chief, find out what's going on. I'm holding the firefighters in quarters because we don't know what's going on. But I know there's a shooting at the address I'm very familiar with. As I'm going there, trying to get a hold of people on via radio, trying to focus on driving, my cell phone rings. Who is it? It's the love of my life that I've been with since I was 21 years old. And what does she say? And I used to cry every time I said this. But she said, "Is he going to come and get us?"
Wow.
It would have been the perfect setup to call in some sort of incident, knowing, because chiefs go, we go do our job, you know. It's a sort of joke like, "Hey, honey, a tornado's coming. You know, I got a cracker and a bottle of water under the steps there. I'm going to head to the station. You know, if anything happens, we'll come dig you out," you know, because we always leave our family. Doesn't it seem that way? The fire service,
Right. Yes.
EMS.
Absolutely.
The long story is Al, after he left the fire station, went home. He picked up his son. He was young at the time. Dropped him off at their meeting area. He went home, shot his wife, killed her, called 911 and said, "There's a shooting at my residence. My son's at this location," and killed himself. And that changed my life. I was up at night, like I said, thinking of him so many times. My heart was racing. I had anxiety. I couldn't focus on my job. Sometimes I would just be working. You ever read a book and you read a whole chapter and then you thought, "Oh my gosh, I don't even know what that chapter felt like."
Right.
That was my entire day at times, for not just one day, but weeks. Because I was so focused on what I'm going to say is a psychological threat, right? It was a threat to my job, calling everybody. And as a new chief, you want to do well, right? As a new leader, you want to do well. You want people to like you, which is one of the barriers of good leadership, is we're focused on being liked all the time, when we have to focus on, are those the people you want to be liked by? You know, right?
Right.
So at any rate, that changed my life. And I started to then, after this incident, putting it all together. Our organization skyrocketed after this. We came together. There's so much more to the story. It made headline news. You can Google my name. Google it. You'll read it. It made headline news. And it led me to this question. Just like I told you, how can a guy or a gal who's worked hard to get to the chief level not know how to deal with those kinds of situations? And that's when I started to dig deep into definitions. I mean, I didn't even know what narcissist was.
Right.
I didn't even know the true meaning of bullying or harassment or dangerous or, you know, these psychological, social hazards or biases or diversity in many different forms. I had no idea what that was as a fire chief. I mean, you asked me what a LDH is and what a hider and a spanner wrench. You know, you asked me where the basement nozzle is or how to make a positive ventilation. Yeah, I'm on it all day. Definition of fire. Yeah. But when you transition, as you stated earlier in the opening, from the operational position to actually not only operational, but you now are the portion of the operation moving the ship forward, you have to know the basics. So I started developing a class, dealing with difficult people, and I add and their organizational impacts. Now, you can go search for dealing with difficult people in many aspects. I bring the fire EMS side to it. And I also like to bring the fire EMS side into the corporate world to talk about my story. An average guy who got into a position, thought he knew what he was doing, and quickly found out, I'm not afraid of it. I'll tell anybody this. I didn't know what I was doing when it came to dealing with these complex personnel issues, especially during the recession of 2008, where people were leaving because they lost their jobs. I had suicides. I had divorces. They were losing their house. I had a dangerous person poking people in the chest. I had all kinds of stuff going on, and it's taxing.
It is.
It's taxing.
It is.
And it can change your mental, your ability to even think positively. I consider myself a pretty positive person, a pretty positive mindset. Right. But there are times when I may have been difficult and I may have been a pain in the butt. Why? Because I had all these influences on me. The whole pass the monkey on the shoulder thing, they were all on me. And I go home, and what happens when you go home? I don't want to talk to my family that much. I'm processing stuff. I'm looking at stuff. Oh, you fell off your bike, honey. Get up and wipe the dust off your, changes your mood. You lose a lot. You lose a lot of who you are as a leader. So there's plenty of goods in leadership if you search for them and you have a purpose to actually be a good leader. If you are looking to get a colored helmet, you don't need a colored helmet to be a leader.
That's right.
And sometimes I wonder if there's a chemical chain reaction in that helmet color that goes through the brain and messes things up, Once they get that helmet on, it's like, who did this? Where did this guy come from? He used to be the nicest guy around, and now he's like, you undo it. It's like, no, that isn't what it's about, right? But you don't need a colored helmet.
If you think about it, what happens to a person who gets exposed to too much radiation or chemicals or heat, or what happens to that person when you get exposed to those kinds of hazards? Eventually you get harmed, you get damaged, and you're focusing so much on how to take the pain or the hurt away from the exposure that of course you aren't any good to anybody else.
Right.
You can't be, because you're so just sitting and listening to your story brings back some very interesting memories.
Yeah. And
brings back almost some very interesting emotions that a lot of leaders don't talk about. So again, you're not the only person who's been in a leadership role who's been exposed to that type of stress.
Right.
You're not the only person who's been exposed to situations where, where people have, ultimately, died by suicide and lost their homes and all this crazy stuff kind of going on. So why is it that this isn't discussed when people are put in leadership positions in the first place? Why is it that it's not discussed? Why is it that we have, as a society, this kind of Pollyanna attitude about leadership that says, oh, if you're a great leader, you can wave the magic wand, everybody will follow you and it'll all be great.
Yeah.
Well, not all the time.
Right.
Not all the time. Sometimes it is wonderful. There's nothing like seeing somebody that you've recruited, promoted, worked with, to see them be successful and see them accomplish some great things. There's nothing like seeing workers really do a great job and really and get the accolades they deserve. But that doesn't happen all the time. That's just not the real world. Sometimes things don't go the way any of us expect them to go. And to your point, many of us, I became a supervisor at 27 years old. Had never supervised anybody in my life. As a matter of fact, I was in my, probably late 40s before I ever supervised people younger than me. Wow. So a very similar circumstance. You get in young, you're excited, you go to school, you try to take these classes and such to be better. But even in our education, we don't have enough conversation about what about the other person who isn't as, they don't
Yeah.
necessarily agree with you. They don't go along. And in many cases, and I don't know this person, but I think if we dug into his history, we would find out that he was traumatized by somebody.
Yeah, I would agree.
And so hurt people hurt other people.
That's right.
They just do. So it shouldn't be a surprise that they hurt other people because they're hurt. And sometimes it ends up again in that ultimate situation. So now with this lived experience, this traumatic situation or period of time that you went through, how do you help people figure out what they're supposed to do as leaders? So how do you deal with difficult people? What do you tell people in terms of how to address that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I had to find out what the definition of difficult person was, because there really wasn't one back in the days, So I created my own definition. A difficult person is one who consistently changes the mood of the organization and creates fear in others so that they can't be the person they want to be. It's that easy. That's my definition because that's what I experienced, right?
Sure.
So my job has been now across the country, traveling and trying to teach people about the basics. First, I tell my story because then they can say, wow, this person's been through it too, right? And it's probably really on the high end of what anybody will ever experience. But I also want them to know exactly what you said. You're not alone.
Right.
None of you are alone watching this podcast. I went down the rabbit hole of I'm dealing with this by myself. There's really good research out there that says people being bullied will likely go through that themselves. Why? Because other people don't want to be part of it. They don't want to become the target from the perpetrator. They would rather stay out of it. But in the meantime, your fellow worker is in a state of mind where they are just hoping maybe for a couple minutes you'll ask, how are you really doing? What can I do to help? How can I support you? And don't let your coworkers go through it alone, because I went down the rabbit hole alone, thinking I'm the only guy in the world going through this. And that's what I'm doing now. I get calls a couple a week, I'd imagine. Couple of weeks, they say, hey, Chief, I'm going through this. And I realize this is therapy for me. This is why I started this. I used to cry at conferences, not intentionally, but I'd tell the story. And then eventually the crying's gone away because I'm helping people now. But I tell them, one, you're not alone. Two is we have to know the basics. We have to know what each definition means. We need to identify what your culture is and see if there's a glitch in the culture. Is it a policy or a past practice? Too many people say, we got a policy on that. No, it's just a past practice. Initiating people and doing mean things to people. And I say this in the fire service and the EMS I think the community would be very surprised that our public safety officials who are on the highest shelf right along the military in many ways are acting like that. I don't get it. Right. We need to change it. So how do you change it? Well, we do it together. If you think the fire chief or the leader of Google or wherever knows what's going on the floor all day, every day, I'm going to tell you they don't. There are so many times as a chief, especially in a bigger organization, where you're thinking, how come I didn't know about that? You didn't need to know about it, Chief. We took care of it on the floor. That's exactly what should happen, right?
Right.
If we all came together and we defined what our culture we wanted our culture to be. If we defined what we want our culture to be and we understand the basics and we know what our mission is and our vision and we remember what we said during our interviews and all the great things you were going to do, if we all did that together, we would readily identify someone who came in that was odd. Right? Someone that had a behavior that was different. And we could go work on them together. Hey, and due to PTSD and other things, we don't just, disregard our peers. We ask the question, hey, how you doing? Not the weather, but let's get into that courageous talk where we're actually talking about what matters. Let's not talk about the game and how are you doing taking care of your mother with cancer? Or how are you doing at that last traumatic incident? I mean, is there anything we can do? I mean, seriously, I'm here for you. When's the last time you called a friend or even dropped a note? Could you imagine getting a card in the mail? It takes you 2 seconds to drop a card that says, I'm thinking of you, hope you're okay. Here's my phone number. And just reach out. Create a habit of calling 5 people a week and just say, how you doing? Well, that's odd. Why are you calling me? Seriously, I'm on an approach now where I'm going to call 5 people a week and just say, how you doing? Because I'm really curious on how you're doing. Because I care about you. You're a good friend or whatever, or a good colleague,
Right. And those things can actually become the new practice. What would it be like if you had that kind of environment where instead of the pranks and the hazing and the mental and verbal abuse that goes on in some organization, and again, this is not just a bunch of men or a bunch of women or a bunch of whatever people, fire service or military. It is humans. Humans sometimes are this way to each other because in many cases, this is the way they were treated. It was done to them. So who's going to break the cycle? And instead of abusing the colleague and say, look, I'm going to say something kind to him. I'm going to send him a card. I'm going to call him. I'm going to send him an email. I'm going to do something positive and uplifting. And what would it be like? What kind of organizations would we have if people did that as opposed to some of the other things?
That's exactly right. And those people need that. The little jokes about the person, and I've dealt with this. I had a firefighter who was a super firefighter, but he was short. And over time, those jokes about being short became harassment to him.
Right.
At first we all laugh, and then everyone else laughs, You really have to know your audience and know when it's funny or not, especially with the newer generations now.
Right.
And in the fire EMS side, since we're in October, but we're seeing more females in the fire service, which I love. My youngest daughter is a career firefighter. So I get to hear all kinds of stuff that happens at the firehouse. But she's the change agent. She will say right away, I don't need to know that, and I don't appreciate that comment. That isn't a joke we all needed to hear, and gradually changing the culture by being someone who isn't afraid to say what needs to be said too,
Right.
And we're stronger in numbers. The wolf pack will come at you.
Right.
You can have a wolf pack come back at them to say, it's just not the culture we need here. We have enough stress in the job, high stress, time compressed environments that just wear us out on a 24-hour shift because we're sleep deprived and we're not eating well because we're on a job for 6 hours and we miss dinner and breakfast and lunch and everything else. We have enough stress, and it's a significant recruitment issue too today. Is leadership really is, and retention is leadership are really the issues. Is we have, I'm going to say the older generations are now leading organizations, and our newer generations, they're not mixing, right? They're speaking different language. We got cork board and white eraser boards on this side, and we have Instagram and flat screens on this side. Right. And we're trying to communicate on a cork board and a piece of paper when the people who use flat screens have never even heard of a cork board, That's
right. That's right. Yes.
I mean, there's a lot of generational differences too. We could go about all day long, well as body language, the way we use our body, how people interact with our body language, staring too long, a diverse workforce.
Yes.
All that stuff could be different based off how they grew up and who's in charge, There's some cultures we pull up to the scene and we can't do anything with the patient until we speak to the elder.
That's right.
And those things come to work.
Yes,
they come to work.
They do.
And when they come into the workforce, they think maybe some of what they're used to is interpreted wrong from those who don't understand that. And we get conflict.
Right.
So
Right.
I think it's important to know that people don't come with a workbook.
Right. That's right.
I could go
That's
buy
exactly.
any tool or any appliance or anything nowadays, and it'll clearly explain how to do it, how not to get hurt, and how to be safe with it. But when someone comes into the workforce, you don't have that. And do you ask that? Do you have them create their own little workbook on what you like and what you don't like and what offends you, what don't offend you, and have those courageous discussions? Most people don't.
Wow. That what you just dropped was a gem. It really was, because so in my research, I looked at psychosocial hazards and came up again with a definition that's unique. A psychosocial hazard is a psychosocial factor that's perceived or experienced by the person exposed as a threat that in turn affects their behavior.
Sure.
So it might not be a threat to you. It's one to me.
Right.
It's something it's an experience that I'm having that causes me to act in a kind of a different way.
Right.
And what you just mentioned, this having the conversation and having it early about what works for you. I honestly believe that every organization should reinvent themselves every time they get a new person.
Yeah.
Every time you get a new person, it to some degree should look at, okay, the way we do things here, because we've added this new person, we're going to slightly adjust it so that other person feels safe here, feels like they belong, feels like it's a place that they should stay at. Because unfortunately, what organizations do, this is the way we are. It was set up 40, 50, or 100 years ago. This is the way we are. And if you don't fit this, then you have to go.
That's
and
exactly
that's the problem that organizations are having, because just due to generational differences, people don't see it that way anymore. They don't want to write stuff down on a piece of paper. They don't, they communicate in different ways. And the question for the organization, and particularly for the leader, is can you or are you even interested in creating an environment so different people feel safe just like you do?
Right.
Are you interested? Are you interested? Wow. Right. So we could carry this on longer, but I just so one final thing that I you're not, as I said, you're again not the only person who's been through this, but one of the few who'll talk about it. I find that for all kinds of reasons, people aren't as candid about their experiences as you. That's something I've always respected from the first time I heard this story. Is like, wow. Because again, I believe that it happens to other people and they just kind of, I don't want to talk about it, but you're talking about it, I believe, can help other people. Right. And I agree with you. There's something therapeutic about being able to share with others something that you didn't hear. So if there are folks out there, they really, they stumbled on the podcast. They, maybe because it was you or me, I don't know. They stumbled across this conversation and they're sitting there thinking, wow, I really want to talk to him more about that. I want to, what is there more? They want to reach out to you. They want to learn more. How would they do that?
Yeah. Well, I think you're going to have my contact information on your podcast. You can use my email or call my phone number that's on there. I would love to talk to you. You can go on LinkedIn, Jerry Streich on LinkedIn. I'm on there a lot. But I would love to talk to you. Or, it doesn't have to be about business per se. If you're struggling with something similar to what I have struggled with, and I still struggle with it today, I'm going to be honest with you, is that there are some things that trigger me like, whoa, that's familiar, I am a believer that leaders and managers can experience post-traumatic stress leading and managing. There's no doubt about it. It doesn't have to be on a traumatic incident. It could be on a defamation case or anything, right? But you can call me or contact me and just say, hey, Chief, here's what I have. And I'm going to tell you this. You're not alone. You're not alone. I know Dave's story. He's experienced it. I can tell you all kinds of chiefs and non-chiefs and firefighters that have dealt with it. But my real question is always, why do we tolerate it? Not Jerry tolerate it. Why do we? Why do we tolerate it? Why are you on the floor and allowing it to happen? Why are you allowing someone to experience it and not saying a word? What are you afraid of? And are you afraid of being a target? Well, that may prove the case that they're targeting people.
Right.
You have to fight for one another.
Right.
And create the culture that you look forward to coming to work. Because you were hired to keep the organization going.
Right.
And your time in the job, no matter where you are, 20 to 30 years. But that organization is 150 years old. It's going to keep going. And you're either going to leave a legacy or you're going to leave a tragedy. You choose it. You choose it.
Wow.
Every day you get that choice.
Wow. Well, Chief, thanks very much for sharing your story, for sharing the pearls of wisdom on how those who may be in similar situations, how they can deal, and how perhaps their circumstance or situation come out a little bit different. If you're watching this episode on the Flourish DX YouTube page, please do like, subscribe, and share. We want to get more folks understanding about these really important topics, particularly here in the United States. We have work to do here, folks.
Yeah.
We really do. And if you're watching or listening to this podcast for the first time, welcome. I hope something that you've heard will bring you back to an episode in the future. Previous episodes of the podcast can be found on the psychhealthandsafetyusa.com webpage. You can feel free to become a part of the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by connecting to us on LinkedIn. Please become one of our subscribers there. And that's it. That's it. We are Jerry, so good to see you again. Good to hear your story. Good to hear the great things that you're doing. And for those of you, again, who are watching and listening, we hope to see you back next time on the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Thanks very much.
Tune in each Friday for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.